and welcome to Therabites, where we bring you bite-sized episodes, each one a piece of the puzzle that helps to explain the therapy world, the research behind it all, and how it relates to families. My name is Dr. Dana Paul, physiotherapist and clinical lead at the Healthy Strides Foundation. It is my privilege to be hosting this podcast, one that is directed for families of children with neurodisabilities. We hope to be able to answer some of your questions through this format. To help us navigate our way through these big questions, we have the lovely, the one and only Kate co-hosting this podcast. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you, Dana. So great to be here again, continuing our conversations.
I love it. It's been really great because it's not only just been questions, it's been like great points of discussion.
Yes, yeah. And we're getting such good feedback. It's really nice to hear that these discussions we're having are helping.
Yes. And I think a lot of the questions have been coming in pretty fast and thick as well.
Oh my gosh. We're trying to work through which ones we're going to cover. I know. It's great.
It's so good. So make sure, we will cover it.
Definitely.
We'll just obviously do it over a series of a few weeks.
Yes. But please keep sending them in. We are loving it.
So
and
good.
Lots of familiar themes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's good.
Yeah, I love that. Well, funnily enough, no one ever really asked for a particular area that they want to have a weird bit of information about.
Yes.
So I'm just going to keep going on my trajectory of finding weird facts
until we
that
get
I find
a
really
request.
interesting. I know, I love it. Don't give me too many requests, otherwise I have to really dig deep for them. But what I found really interesting that was recently published in this really well-known journal, which is called Nature. It's actually one of the biggest journals around, because the bigger the journal, the better credibility often does happen, because you can just, anyone could start a journal, I suppose. So how is it credible?
That's true.
And then to say, hey, I'm published. So that's always something worth learning about. So Nature is one of the big ones, and scientists have published there that they have now completely mapped out an adult fly brain. I had to read it twice. I'm like, what kind of brain? Is this a fly? Yes, legitimately the fly that you swat, which is the...
Are you going to make me feel guilty about this now?
Oh, no. Well, I don't know if I still feel guilty. They annoy the heck out of me. Because they're starting to appear now, aren't they? It's getting warmer. And they're the young ones that stick on you a bit more. Like they're just, ugh.
I don't mind the big fat slow ones. You can sort of shoo them out the door.
Yeah. And you feel satisfied when you catch them because you can actually catch them.
Yes.
But an adult fly brain, what they wanted to do is map out their entire brain system.
Okay.
And it's incredible. They've actually published the photo of the different neuronal networks.
Wow.
And it's insane. And there are 139,255 neurons, which really reflects an animal that is capable of walking and seeing. And it's like a huge, scientific feat to be able to have mapped that out, because think about how small they are. And there's that many neurons. And so they've compared it to like smaller brain systems like the fruit fly larva that only has 3,016 neurons. So it just shows when you're walking, you're seeing and you're annoying the heck out of people, you will have nearly 140,000 neurons. So
wow, it takes a lot of neurons to do that.
It does. So imagine for us what it means. Yeah. And like the difference between a smaller brain and the development and what that looks like. And so, I think that's the whole direction of this, is to really reflect on just what's involved when you are actually engaged in an activity. So anyway, it's not really affecting us because I'm still going to swat that fly. I'm not going to stop.
I might think twice about it now.
But yeah, impressive. It's 140,000. So anyway.
And, that links in to our... Well, I guess to our overarching
Thanks for trying. That was great. I love that. I love that. Not too out there. Well, what do you have for us to actually discuss of value today?
Okay, so this is one of those really common ones that we've been getting through, and some conversations that we've been having in clinic.
Yep.
So I thought this was a really important one to cover off this week.
Great.
And also I know I could benefit from discussing this too.
Okay,
as
cool.
it's something it is going to come up.
Yes.
I'm sure.
Okay.
So the question... Yeah.
I like it.
The question is, when I am unsure or unhappy with a medical diagnosis, an outcome, a lack of outcome, or just anything in that field, so it might be therapy related or medical related, how could I politely but confidently ask for a second opinion?
Oh, that's a doozy.
I know. Thanks, Dana.
That's a doozy. That's a good one, though.
It's so good. As soon as I've been having these conversations, I'm like, oh my gosh, yes. What do you do? And
and it takes some time to get through a place where you can be confident.
Definitely.
So let's take it straight back to the original that we often talk about is the medical model.
Yes.
And I actually see the medical model in full flight often when I'm in different countries. So I've definitely noticed in Southeast Asia there's this whole medical model where, and it's mainly because there's a shortage of health professionals.
Okay.
It's kind of like, hi, doctor, yes, doctor, whatever you say, doctor. And it's just like they tell you and you accept, you take and you go.
Yep.
And I remember the first few times I observed that, I'm like, hang on, ask a question. They're not kings. We could ask them questions, but they come in such short supply that by the time they get there, there is this real hierarchical model, which when you think about it, maybe think about when you were younger, that probably was something that you would have seen. It was like a big deal to go see the doctor.
Yes,
they're usually in a white cloak, and they would give their opinion and you would just take it kind of thing. And so there was that whole model, and that's really been dismantled in countries like Australia over the past few decades. To a point now where you can have great conversations with your doctor. And you think about, going to the hospital now with your pediatrician, you probably can sit there and have a bit of a quick, chuckle about something.
Definitely.
That barrier has been broken. Right? So now it's more of a model where it's what we call very family-centered. And the idea is to be able to really think about what the family and the child are experiencing and how can health professionals support them. So there's been a big shift. So I think knowing that background is useful for medical model, where it was all about the health professional. And now really about the family, and we call that family-centered practice. You'll also hear it being called person-centered practice. So as it rightfully should be, focus on the person that's coming to see you.
Yeah, that's good to have that other perspective that is what they're now calling it and what they've been trained in, I guess.
And it's so important because we talk about it in conferences all the time. These are some of the things that come up in conference proceedings in all different professions, is trying to really shift that and trying to get everyone to come on board with it. So it's actually a big field and a big focus. People specialise in this.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so having that background is probably really useful to know that
really
what we're actually working on being better at.
Yeah. I think that already just makes that a little bit easier to know that you are welcome to giving feedback or having that conversation.
And you can probably really think about times that, I can think about going to the GP. There'll be certain GPs that I would like because they're more person-centred. They'll actually ask me. Versus something that's a bit more medical where it's like, this is what I'm saying, this is what you're going to do, and you can't really ask any questions. And that's we often call that bedside manner, right? That's how we distinguish between it. So we can often feel that subjectively when you're actually having any interactions. But if you're thinking about where everything is shifted, person-centred, family-centred, that means already that not one person can hold the answers to all things. And because our children are often very complex, they are young individuals, growing, developing, all that's happening. On top of that, often a diagnosis that includes a lot of different medical professionals, and therefore you often have a lot of interacting components. And when you do go to a hospital setting, what often happens is you'll have different departments. And so it is everyone tries really hard to get everyone to come on the same page and be cohesive, but there's a lot of challenges within that as well, because you not only have the consultants who have so much experience, so much training, and have seen so many instances, but they're also teaching our up-and-coming new generations of doctors and specialising in an area. So you've got all these medical training doctors who are coming up into that too. So there's a teaching hospital mentality as well. And so I would say knowing that means that when you come into a medical setting, come into it knowing that it's very likely not one person's going to have the answer to everything. And they probably know that already anyway. Okay. So that's a good thing to start.
It's really good to know. This is all very helpful, Dana.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Thank you.
So I guess my question to you, because it's obviously something that you probably experience in going to that, is there's probably consultants that look after a particular area that will have a lot of experience, and it's also their job to be quite humble in the sense that they wouldn't have all the answers, because we've spoken about before, the information comes from the family. They're the ones that can help them piece together this potential mystery if something is happening. So have you experienced it before where you've had to ask for another opinion?
I have, luckily it wasn't too big of a deal, and so that was good. I guess I've experienced both ends. So I guess the first one is in ED, you quite often find that it will be like a resident or someone like that who'll come in and see you first.
Yep.
So we did have one occasion where a resident said something that just didn't quite make sense to me. There was no one at the time to question it with, and I think we were just lucky that, well, not lucky because we ended up being admitted, but being admitted then meant that the next morning we would have our whole team come and do it. And so that's when I was able to check that information with them and get clarity on that, which was really good.
Sure.
But we've also had like a really good experience where we did have a resident at one of our ED visits, and they actually said, they don't know enough. And so they promised me, I'm going to run every test possible because I want to get as much information and then I'm going to take it to the consultant and then we're going to come up with an answer, which I was really stoked with because that was another thing that you don't always get. You don't always get them. They sometimes can think that they will know the answer based off the information that you're telling them. So that was almost a benefit in having someone less experienced who was open to saying they were less experienced.
Yeah, sure. And that all comes down to that person having to take that responsibility to be humble, to have humility in knowing that there's actually so much more to learn. Because humility is just really an openness to learning, really.
Yes, exactly.
And you can't necessarily change that in that person. But it is absolutely okay when you feel in your gut and you know your child well. This is where it comes back down to you knowing your child well, where something doesn't quite fit with what you're seeing, whether it needs to be escalated. So a good example is maybe someone not taking you as seriously as you'd like them to, and you're feeling that there's something there.
Yes.
It is absolutely okay to say, look, I hear what you're saying, but I'm actually quite concerned about my child right now, and I would really love for you to have a chat to his consultant, which is this person.
Yeah.
And so you can actually try to provide that avenue for them because everyone needs to learn. Everyone, and we do need to make sure we cultivate those environments as well. But what you need in that moment is to get some advice and to get the next step. And that's absolutely okay to very politely say, look, I understand what you're saying, but I really, really do think that there's something else going on here. And I just would really appreciate if you could elevate this. Is there someone else that can help us with this situation? Because I really can't leave here today unless I get that really because I'm just really worried.
Yeah.
And the only time that you tend to really need to push for a second opinion is in that situation is when you are worried about something.
Yes.
And this is where it's important to have your voice heard. And people will rely on that. That is actually really important. And people do want that. Yes. If they don't realise they need that, you actually remind them why they do need that. And that's okay. That's okay.
Good. Yeah. Yeah, that did actually just remind me of another one where I didn't get listened to again at a different time in ED. And that time, I guess I didn't know how to speak up. But now what I did reflectively is when we have a similar issue, I say, we've had this happen before. And the doctor admitted that he was wrong in that situation. And I'm just letting you know that we need to look at this in a different way, or could you please check the notes from that to see what he wrote about it? And it's hard. Like you wish you didn't have to do that. Definitely.
But there are times when you need to. And I know when I've had to go in to advocate for a family member of mine where you just go, actually, that doesn't look quite right. I really do need to elevate this. And it feels uncomfortable, but it's you're sort of there as an advocate for your child, and you need to say something, and it's okay to say something. And I think if you do it as respectfully and politely as you can, you're more likely to get someone on the other side going, okay, no, I do hear you.
Yes.
Because the minute things elevate, it's hard to have that conversation.
Definitely. And I think that is always a concern for us as parents is you don't want to annoy anyone, or you don't want to pee anyone off or anything like that because, these are the people that are looking after your child. And so you don't want to say anything disrespectful or be perceived as disrespecting them or anything. Yeah. But at the same time, you do want to push and advocate for your child, and you do want to show them that actually I know better in some circumstances.
Yeah, that's right. And that comes back down to family-centered practice. And that's where everything is shifting to. I would say allied health has done a really great job in taking that on. Yeah. And I think a lot of other specialties, that has taken a lot longer to come along with. But it's definitely on the horizon. And then hospitals, their charters, their code of conduct will write in there it's family-centred practice. Yeah. So you have a lot there go in with in terms of what you would stand for.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, that's medical. Have you had any allied health experiences, Kate?
Look, we've definitely had a few. It was more so in the early days. And it felt like no one was willing to go against anyone or speak up about anything. So it was really tricky. Like, we looked into a therapy called Voiter therapy. There was a family that sort of endorsed it. We looked into it and, we decided to spend that money to travel to get that therapy. And I do wish that I asked for more opinions. Like, we told other allied health professionals that we were going to do it, and they were like, oh, are you? And you could see that they were a bit unsure, but no one sort of stepped up to sort of say, why don't you go do some more research or something like that. So I think for me, I wish that I asked other people for a second opinion on that and didn't just go with, unfortunately, just go with that small snippet of a couple of families endorsing it and the person doing the practice endorsing it. I should have asked.
Gosh, what an experience, isn't it? And it is so hard to navigate because, it doesn't matter whether it's early days or later on, there's usually a new challenge because your child's growing. They've never done that before. So you look into things and the internet is full of things, of many promises that they're not necessarily held to. And that is the biggest challenge we are all facing at the moment, not just as families, but allied health clinicians who might have heard of these things and things might be swayed in a particular way. So my advice for all of this is usually asking for advice, but asking for the right advice for the person who probably can provide that information. So I always go back to evidence-based practice. I mean, it's our code of conduct. We should be basing things on evidence. And it's taken me time to actually have the courage to talk about it. But if I don't provide information, it's really hard for families to make an informed decision.
Definitely. That's what we need is someone to speak up for us and say, hey, look, you need to look into this a bit more, instead of, I felt like everyone was sort of like cringing when I was saying it, but not wanting to take my power from me, if you know what I mean. But I just didn't understand what the cringing was. And so
it's probably family-centered practice taken too far, where it's like, and I've seen that happen where it's family-centered practice, they can do what they want. And it is, but they can do what they need to with information, with informed information. So the information I provide is never personal. It's like, you should do this, you don't do this. You'll pretty much never hear me say that unless it's dangerous. If I know something is dangerous, like hyperbaric oxygen therapy has been dangerous for some kids. They've lost their hearing. Like, you can get bad side effects from it with no benefit. Right? So there's instances where I might say that. But in the cases of non-evidence-based interventions, and Voiter is one of them, where it has been studied and it's been shown to be not effective in this population, there's just other things that are better. And yes, there's not enough studies on it, but the theory behind Voiter, so understanding the mechanism, going back to the fly, when you understand the brain and how we learn, we all learn in a certain way, and there's the certain methods of how we learn. But Voiter, for example, just contradicts completely what we know about the brain and how it learns. So I can very confidently say, look, it's classified as non-evidence-based. One is either there's not enough information to show about the full benefits of it. It's actually been classified as below the line of being worth it. There's just better stuff out there to get what you want. So in terms of your value for money, and also just the theory behind it doesn't align with what we know the current science says about how we learn. And for that reason, look, I just think there's better options for it. But, you as a family can make that choice, but I just provide you that information.
I wish you were there when our little dude was 7 months old and we flew him over and tortured him for a week. My poor child. I know, that's what it felt like though.
And I'm so sorry you had that experience. That's really, really tough.
But that was a big lesson for me, to ask more questions, go to the right people. So, it was horrible, but at least it's paid off in the sense that I've really learned to advocate for my child now. And that's, and so
getting
important.
the source of information from the right people, because people... if you've experienced something and you've spent a lot of money doing something as a family, it's really hard for you to speak negatively of it. It's just confirmation bias, right? If you've done fundraising for it and all your friends and family put money toward it and you've gone off to do something and you're like, look, deep down, I don't think it's made any difference. But
or the therapist might be really lovely. Like, that's our thing. Our Voiter therapist was the nicest lady ever. Couldn't fault her as a person.
Her bedside manner was great.
Great bedside manner. Yeah, just super welcoming and really nice. And so that makes it even harder to be like, oh, you're a really nice person, but what you're doing isn't working.
Yeah, and I think it's okay to differentiate between the two. Like they're not tied together.
Yeah.
You know, everyone in this era probably does approach it with the best intentions.
Yeah.
And but it is our responsibility as health professionals to provide something that's of actual value. So if you're going to spend your time and your money to come to something and give up time for you to work or time for you to do something productive with your world, you know, we have to be held to that standard.
Yeah.
So asking those questions and trying to find the counter is always good. Like, you've seen all this stuff online. What do you think of it? Like, what does the science say about it?
Yeah.
And so rather than having them subjective opinions about how a person is, whether you like a person or not, let's go down to the science of it first. Let's be a bit objective.
Yes.
And then how can we go from there? So there's a fair bit of that to talk about, I think. But Voyager's
That's
a great
really good
example.
advice.
We know it's non-evidence-based and there's just better things out there.
Yeah.
And it's okay to say that because that's what the science says. The data says that's not my personal opinion.
Yeah.
You know, and you've experienced it in a way too. So we can learn from each other.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Well, that was an interesting one. That
was a good one.
Curved into different areas.
Yeah,
and
I know. I was suddenly remembering all these things. I was like, I haven't had to do that yet, actually.
Yeah, no, that's really good.
And
hopefully that's
definitely
useful.
linked it back to the
We
fly.
did.
Great work.
That was a great challenge. That was quite good, actually.
Thank you so much, Dana. That was really, really helpful.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm glad it is. And it's always great to chat about these things. So, yeah, bit of a slightly longer one. Hope you enjoyed that conversation. We'll talk to you all again next time. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.